Hello, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, comrades. Hello. Live your favorite 60 Minutes program on our most important special, starting with breaking news. Another rash of Russia-phobia has just begun in the form of Ramstein, the head of the Pentagon. Austin promised to provide Kyiv with another $1 billion worth of weapons. Announced that one U.S. fighter Jet 16 will arrive in Ukraine as early as this year. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry has shown footage of Tula paratroopers working at night, destroying Ukrainian militant strongholds. Seversky direction. As the armored commander of the group with the call sign Current said, the 100mm cannon of the infantry fighting vehicle 4 did not leave him any chance as an accomplice, cut off the entire unit of the enemy of the Ukrainian armed forces, suffered heavy losses, and left his position in the village of Berdishi, said Dr. Kim Makovsky, an advisor to the head. But footage from the vicinity of Ocheretyani, where the Russian army managed to break through the front and turn the escape into a sauce, you see. The boys were checking from their positions in pickups, so anxious that a twin was abandoned. He had to catch up with the brothers in arms on there too. The western line of the Russian army is advancing in two directions at the same time, and the northern line is advancing in one direction. Solovyov was liberated by soldiers from the 55th Brigade in southern Arkhangelsk. Russian tricolor flags are developing over the settlement. The success of our soldiers opened the way to Novopokrovskoye Novoselok. This is an important logistics point for the Ukrainian armed forces in this part of the front line. But the footage of our army aviation work was destroyed by the 3005 light multi-purpose guided missile. Operators' observation posts and enemy tactical aviation tirelessly aerial enemy positions in New York, which will soon be called Novgorod again. 500 drones continue to fly to Papa, conduct objective control, and record direct aerial bombs. Day and night militants. Here's another new thing from our engineers who are already capturing enemy equipment on the front line. Unique drone net Honey. So let's call it he tracks down enemy coppers, flies to them from above, releases a net, and then the enemy bird falls, which is a clear example of the People's Military-Industrial Complex that Putin talked about the day before at a meeting of the Russian Federation of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs. The president pointed out that people have received a lot of suggestions in the field of new technologies.
Президент отметил, что от людей поступает огромное количество предложений в сфере новых технологий.
All attempts by the West to bring strategic failure to our country are doomed to failure. Shoigu Vostania said the goal of the special operation will be achieved. The Russian defense minister attended the meeting of heads of military departments of the member states of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Shoigu stressed that we are protecting our people in our historical territory. At the same time, Russia does not threaten, has never threatened NATO, and has absolutely no interest in attacking NATO countries. Talking to Western politicians that the Russians are preparing to invade is an excuse to withdraw troops to our borders, which poses an additional threat to military security. In the world, the West will only increase tensions and try to impose them on sovereign countries. That's why Washington launched its orders in the Ukraine conflict, and now it is doing its best to delay it, and we are listening to it. Politico, citing its sources, assured that the Biden administration could announce a $6 billion aid package for Ukraine today. According to preliminary information, the package will include KRK anti-aircraft missiles, Patriot drones, RAP equipment, artillery shells, air-to-air missiles, but there is a nuance. We're talking about contracts to produce weapons, not removing weapons from stockpiles, that is, weapons that they promise to supply as long as they don't physically exist. Production and transfer to the front line could be delayed for years, the newspaper said. The Pentagon has been assured that it will hand over weapons to Bandera within days, if not sooner. But this is only part of the promise. Which one of the U.S. Department of Defense is modestly silent? Such actions by the U.S. authorities are in no way consistent with their statements about their desire for peace in Ukraine. The farther they can shoot in the forest, the farther they must be pushed away from the new Russian region by increasing buffer or sanitary areas. 800 wrote that this is the comment on the secret supply of long-range missiles from the SHA, and that the Kremlin will spend most of the money allocated to Kiev in the United States. That is, it will be transferred to defense companies to produce new weapons for the Ukrainian armed forces. According to the newspaper, two-thirds of the money allegedly allocated to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan will actually be used to create new jobs in the United States and develop the country's military-industrial complex. But in order to keep the money going, or the turbulent river, the Americans decided to send additional military advisors to the Special Operations Area. They will control the flow of weapons to the front line. Make sure Ukrainians don't break expensive equipment in the same day. The Pentagon made excuses in advance. They said they would send a few people. They wouldn't even get close to the front line. However, even in the back, American advisors can reach the caliber of the concert. Sweden, a new NATO member, is sending troops to Latvia. Of course, in order to contain Russia, Reuters reported that by the beginning of the 20th year, Stockholm will deploy a group of heavy armored vehicles to the Baltic states, including BMP, CN-90, as well as Leopard tanks, German Cat, and Swedish armored vehicles. Western propagandists have vaunted that they are the best in the world. Our soldiers have been burned many times in special operations areas. In addition, the C-90 Leopard will be exhibited at the exhibition of the party's Ministry of Defense. The victory at Poklonia Gora tonight brought the new exhibits of the American howitzer M777-2 modified Hamdi armored vehicle, the British armored vehicle from Axon Husky, the French wheeled tank AMAX-10 Art PR, and even exotic vehicles from Australia and South Africa to the position of the future. The protected Bushmaster and Mamba Miki 2 cars, the Victory Park trophy delivery footage released by the Ministry of Defense, and the historical exhibits of German self-propelled artillery devices. March Tok of the Great Patriotic War. Previously, they were transported from modern Minsk to the exhibition site, so March is translated from German. Now these are no longer self-propelled guns, as in the 3rd Infantry Fighting Vehicle Empire, when Berlin presented the Kiev regime with the victory of Russian weapons and the failure of the West. When they saw the smashed markers on Poklonia Gora, propagandist Bild Kilian Repka caused hysteria among the Germans. He began to shout that this was all Putin's propaganda show on May 9th. At the same time, Victory Park called the so-called celebration of the victory of the Soviet people in the Great Patriotic War itself dubious. In general, the Nazis were just a decent descendant of Goebbels. The Kremlin called the idea of organizing an exhibition on defeated enemy equipment a brilliant one, and expressed confidence that the exhibition would attract great interest from Muscovites and guests in the capital. Let us remind you that the exhibition will open on May 1st. It will work a month ahead of Western equipment seen on Poklonia Gora. There are no American samples. Washington handed over 31 heavy tanks to Kiev, 6 of which were destroyed by Russian forces in the direction of Andreevsky. After that, the Ukrainians hid the remaining cars away from Sin to avoid falling into the hands of the Russians. Write about this with SH, and this press MAUU, Russian Abrams drone flying over the sky of the advanced clouds, instantly detected and turned into scrap metal. A Pentagon official complained to reporters that there is no open area on the front line that you can simply pass through without worrying about being discovered anonymously. William LaPlante, the full deputy defense minister with the support of the SHA, complained that the Russian army was using its aggressive RF system to silence the smart American bomb, J. Lesbian, and it was ruthlessly silencing it, so that Vicky Nuland's vaunted transfer to Kiev proved absolutely ineffective. On the battlefield, they were terrified by Russian electronic warfare and British telegrams. The newspaper complained that the Russians easily interfered with Western aircraft flying over the Baltic Sea. Like, in the last 8 months alone, Russia has knocked down a pillar. Think about it. 46,000 planes are not just anal-cut GPS signals, but also send out fake signals to shoot planes off course. He is even said to have fallen victim to Russian jammers. British Defense Secretary Hapka, when he flew near Kaliningrad, what was he doing there? Our RAP suppressed the navigation system of a RAF plane with an enemy official on board. Shoigu held talks with Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jimen on the sidelines of the meeting of defense ministers of the SCO uprising countries. The head of the Russian military stressed that this was their first personal meeting after the appointment of a Chinese official as the head of the military department at the end of March. The ministers exchanged views on VC with Moscow and Beijing on military cooperation, which is an important factor in world stability. The high dynamic relationship between the Russian and Chinese militaries is particularly important in the current changeable international situation. Shoigu and Chinese Defense Minister Don Dai made important statements from the Kremlin that preparations for Putin's visit to China are in the final stages. Peskov emphasized that any contact between the leaders of Russia and China will attract the attention of the world, and pointed out that Moscow and Beijing cherish their sovereignty and stand up confidently enough to withstand Western pressure. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken came to exert this pressure on China, and Chinese president, who received him, called on Washington to take a positive attitude towards China's development. They said that Blinken seemed to verbally agree that we do not want to confront Beijing and contain its development, and immediately after the talks, he began threatening to impose new sanctions on North Korea for supporting Russia in the Ukraine conflict. If Beijing doesn't take action to solve the problem, Washington will, the arrogant pankaki said. Another piece of news about the rules-based world order. Trump advisors are discussing the possibility of sanctions against countries that refuse to use the dollar, Bloomberg wrote. Among the options, export controls, currency manipulation fees, and tariffs on Washington do not even hide their role as a global gendarmerie, as Gogol wrote. For the sake of order, everyone puts lanterns under their eyes and on their right, and the BRICS countries are at risk of being the first to bear the brunt of such sanctions by the Trump administration. They are actively transitioning to. At a summit last August, they discussed de-dollarizing the currencies of their countries in bilateral trade and protecting the dollar. Trump is actively using the AMOL and Biden as trump cards in the campaign. The dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency. This will be the greatest defeat in American history. According to Tehil, many Americans no longer like Donald or Joe. Polls show 62% of Biden's supporters, and more than a third of Trappists would prefer to replace both presidential candidates with Xi. Americans are so disappointed with their policies that 30% of voters don't care who will win the game. At the same time, most Americans, regardless of race, age, or sex, support Trump's policies. The New York Times published the results of the poll today. 40% said Trump's actions in the White House helped them personally. Biden's policies have benefited only 18% of U.S. citizens. Against this backdrop, Democrats continue to exhaust Trump with legal proceedings so he doesn't have time. No campaign money. Donald himself called it a witch hunt.